You are about to receive downloaded content. Subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive transmission straight to your inbox. Go to downloadedcontent.com to follow us on your platform of choice.
One of the perks of existing in a post-Demiurge paradigm, as I do, is that I never really cared for the term louche. Nothing against Robert Monroe or his contributions in bringing Gnostic cosmology into the 20th century, but the word louche has always seemed a bit cartoonish to me, especially as a pneumatic who has, as Morpheus once implied, seen the fields with my own eyes. Having done so, I can testify that the last thing you want to do in describing what Yaldabaoth, the Archons, or their many acolytes were doing to mankind in the unseen is use phraseology that reduces any sense of horror from what it actually was. The process of stimulating a specific vibration of emotion through trauma, charging it up to 11, and ultimately harvesting it from our backbones when viewed from the third eye is anything but cartoonish, believe me. If you yourself have taken the Enochian trip to the vibrational subterranean chambers where the human hamburger meat is made, then you are nodding in agreement. Because what you saw when you traveled down there paled in comparison to the worst shit Clive Barker ever put on the page. That place, outside of visible light, just lower than your current point of observation within hyperspace, where the spark of Sophia was shoved in and torn out of body after body after body in an unspeakable, perpetual rape, in the most terrifying and indiscernible ways. Hell is far too tame a title to put upon that place where the Archons enriched our life force for consumption without so much as time for them to wipe their mouths. That place from where the Demiurge pulled all his power was insatiable, merciless, cruel beyond measure, and ingenious in its invisible design. Every body that ever contained a spark of light within it ground up in the ethereal gears of a metropolis high on its addiction from human suffering. Suffice it to say, louche is certainly not the sound I would settle on to describe to you what myself, others, and Robert Monroe witnessed behind the veil. Nevertheless, when I say louche, you, dear reader, have a generalized idea of the type of energy harvesting I'm describing. A psychic would have a head knowledge of this, and a pneumatic a first-hand experiential knowledge, which is what I believe is one of the dividing lines between the two. The psychics who are learning about these things file it under things I now know, whereas pneumatics file it under holy fuck of God, it's real, and it's paramount that I get to doing something to put a stop to it. One class knows about it, the other class has experienced it. The latter have no choice after their visit than to climb the tree of Sephiroth and descend the roots of Klipoth toot sweet to amass the level of experience required to finally get into the cosmic game in any meaningful or effective way. From apprentice to sorcerer or from poet to bard, the title a pneumatic carries after their Flammarian translation makes no never mind. You just know after its reality is bestowed upon you that something must be done, and you have a responsibility to play a part in that something using everything you have at your disposal, and if it isn't enough, a duty to attain more. Which is the reason I became a wizard, a manipulator of forces, an occultist of the kindest sorts, the fool and the tarot and the emperor as well, initiated from one batshit crazy thing to another, and rubbing shoulders with magicians of every sort and every rank or file. Wiggled with witches from sea to shining sea, too, and after a long career in the esoteric, I can tell you this, every bit of all that stuff is but trinkets in a toy box to a pneumatic that knows all they need is a white blank page and a little bit of ink to go a long way. After attaining such a level of the Logos, everything else becomes props for show. Not that we can't play pretend with wand or ritual to help a psychic along their way, but when you are in the actual etheric trenches, it's all about the word. If greater education on this topic is required, I will kindly refer you to the wisdom of one Grant Morrison and the near omnipotence of the hypersigil technique. As I said before, your humble author, narrator, and fictional character entered into the post-Demiurge age circa 2017, but I have no doubt the date to the doorway some of you walked through will range from probably 2012 to 2020 or so. Doesn't really matter, because at the point where any pneumatic does, you're screwing around with the whole time-space, space-time fabric, so it's really experienced as more of a plane, to be honest. Which means that, yes, while you exist in an age past the demise of the Demiurge, Others in your reality or observations can still be living at the height of his reign simultaneously. Think of a temporal duck on top of the water, graceful above the line but kicking like a son of a bitch beneath. Now, supposing you, dear reader and fellow pneumatic, have moved into the post-demiurge age by whatever method worked for you, it goes without saying that some distinctions must be made from what was to what now is. The first of which I would like to address is the differences you've noticed from louche extraction to whatever this new form of harvesting is by the Ahrimanic system. Louche, stimulated, cultivated, and extracted by the archons and their acolytes, was very dense, heavy, slow moving from about the mid chakras downward. While not exclusively dependent on physical suffering, it tended to lean more in that direction than what we are experiencing under the Ahrimanic system. This new extraction is by far much more mental and concentrated on what is going on in the mind, though again, not with exclusivity. These differences bring me to the opinion that an altogether different term should be used in the place of louche, and if Robert Monroe felt confident enough to coin his own term, then I see no issue with me following suit. After giving it considerable thought, I fell on the completely made up word chrism, which sounds like the real word chrism, but it's not, because I made it up. And whereas chrism has its own definition, you're free to look up, chrism will be defined in the context of the form of energy Ahriman is fiending for moving forward in this address. Chrism is moving from the mid chakras upward into the crown, where I'm thoroughly convinced its primary substance of extraction is in fact imagination. The crude oil of Yaldabaoth might have been the thick trauma of our minds and bodies, but Ahriman is far more interested in the very inkwell of magic itself, in that raw power of divinity within the power of creation in the right brain activity. The infrastructure of this simulation was maintained by the Demiurge sitting upon his Saturnian throne through the manipulation of subatomic particles with the heaviness of louche. Ahriman, on the other hand, is using an altogether different technique we discussed previously, in that the chrism he is extracting from his servers in psychics is the current underpinning of what we are observing as reality. As you've no doubt concluded, rather than swarms of demi-archons extracting louche from beyond the visible light out of the backbones of wee sparks, Ahriman already has a legion of deployed extractors we see a zombified humanity walking around with all the time in their palms. His greatest tool is the algorithm, and through curated apps posing as news sources and fooling mankind into thinking they are staying informed, Ahriman is hitting psychics from every angle, with Armageddon after Armageddon narrative to continue perpetually this apocalypse edging. Through the imaginative power of those connected to the pleroma, the agenda of our newest adversary is to maintain a constant environment of the end, where his targets either succumb to hopelessness or cling to the coming of some outside savior or more, both of which neutralize the probability of those who can, creating a reality other than the one currently serving Ahriman. If there's anything to be said about revelation of the method, all one needs to do is ponder the term doom scrolling in light of this gnosis to get a clear understanding of exactly what's going on. In the Age of Ahriman, the entire agenda is contained in those two words coupled together. Prophets of old would script in scrolls for the higher beings that employed them, and in the consciousness of the collective would in turn make the scribbles reality. In our current era, the infinite scroll of social media platforms is inundating the minds of psychics with a script of Ahriman's choosing also. Acting as a peer-to-peer network, the combined power of their imagination is creating and sustaining a society and or civilizations that are constantly teetering on the brink of oblivion, but never falling off. This makes for a very fruitful chrism farm if I've ever seen one. Why imagination? Why would Ahriman choose to harvest this frequency over the tried and true method of emotion that Yaldabaoth was so fond of? Though this address is aimed at pneumatics, I won't assume that every pneumatic has walked a magical path or initiated themselves in some form of sorcery or other system. For those that haven't, it must be understood that regardless of if one practices witchcraft, voodoo, necromancy, chaos magic, or any other form of harnessing forces, if imagination is not the foundation, the magic is simply not there. As I said before, magic itself is the ability to take that which is intangible in the mind and through interconnected actions bring it into one's experience. The fancy words, wands, rituals, or other aesthetics are merely there to strengthen the focus of the practitioner's imagination. Visualization, or imagination, plus vibration, or emotion, equals manifestation. The clearer the visualization and the more intense the vibration means the faster and greater the manifestation will be. This is the heart of all magic. Under the rule of the Demiurge, concepts like this and Gnostic texts such as the Nag Hammadi Library were not so easily known or accessible, so monopolizing imagination wasn't too much of a priority. He had that on lockdown with inquisitions, witch trials, and book burnings, courtesy of the Roman Catholic Empire. But times have changed, and with the advent of the internet and the Gnostic revival exploding after the 1940s, orthodoxy is no longer the bit and bridle it once was. Rather than trying to suppress the information from psychics on reality manipulation, Ahriman's tactic has instead been to hijack it. He has flooded the zone, as it were, and convinced an entire generation that they all have had some spiritual awakening, when in actuality, they are confusing their spiritual awakening with simply being on the internet. The algorithm, spoon-feeding Hylix a series of short-form content on chakras, energy healing, third-eye meditation techniques, or other metaphysical information, does not constitute what one would identify as an actual spiritual awakening. It is simply saturating the NPC population with the lingo and look of spirituality, to isolate and diminish the full capabilities of the psychics, who feel small and at the mercy of some New Age ocean that tosses them about with its own gimmicks and money-back guarantees. The handheld digital tarot deck Ahriman weaponized has them buying into narratives spit out by the celebrity gurus of the week, waiting in anticipation for some timeline shift or great rescue from a galactic federation of light that only communicates with channelers who make a living doing guess what? Fucking channeling, that's what. While their imaginative power is locked into these algorithmic fairy stories, the top YouTube channels or personalities are hypnotizing them in the suggestion that whatever is a-coming is just over the horizon. Psychics who actually hold the power to craft reality do just that. They keep the culmination of whatever they are waiting for just over the horizon, again and again and again, day after day after day, swipe after swipe after swipe. All the while, Ahriman feeds, his coffers being filled with chrism that allows him the power to sustain our current simulation to his specifications. So where do we pneumatics go from here? How do we pluck ourselves from the Ouroboros of apocalypse edging Ahriman has the psychics generating with all his glossy dopamine drip feeds? What can we do to effectively assist in the redemption of Sophia's sparks and psychics in this new age of Ahriman? I think the first thing is the most obvious, and that is to ensure that we ourselves have not wandered into the digital quicksand that pulls psychics back into the chaos of Konoma. Before attempting to put our hand out to those we came here to assist, we must ensure that under the new rules of the simulation post-Demiurge, we pneumatics have untethered ourselves from Ahriman's tendrils. I won't go into some exhaustive exposition on the evils of technology or bore you with information you already know regarding how detrimental a lot of this stuff on our devices is to the brain and body. You do not need me to convince you, as you are already well aware, that doom scrolling is exactly how it sounds and is doing a number on the nervous system of users that can clearly be seen in society itself as it lemmings its way off a cliff. The human body we find ourselves in was not designed to receive the amount of input it does at the speed it does, and we aren't going to pretend that the apparent direction all this is going in is not some Borg-like hive mind. It is abundantly clear that's the end game of Ahriman. For proof, all one needs to do is go out in public and observe the uniformity of the masses and downward gaze and upheld glowing hand. It isn't practical for me to suggest that we go off grid or renounce technology either, as chances are this information is probably arriving to your awareness via the systems of subject. The response need not be so extreme. The response, I think, does need to be disciplined, though. I think as pneumatics, we must become and remain very mindful of how these systems Ahriman is using affect us mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically, with honesty, and set strict boundaries on how much we use them and for what purposes. In my opinion, The best way to gauge this thus far is to set a date to begin a digital detox and plan to unplug from all these curated conversation apps for no less than 1 week. Once initiated, take notes on your sleep patterns, emotions, thoughts, and productivity. Basically, get a good idea of how much you have already been hindered by even casual usage of TikTok, the bilbos of TikTok, as it were. Afterwards, adjust your exposure accordingly. We pneumatics must remove from our eyes first that which is needful to be removed from the eyes of psychics. We must not be lulled into the slumber or seduction that these systems can be utilized in a casual way any longer. To do so is akin to a rabid alcoholic convincing himself that no more will follow the first drink. This same point of view must be adopted in the temptation to scroll for Ahriman. While this may sound like I'm saying complete abstinence, it's not quite what I mean. Rather, when we pneumatics engage with a 3-inch by 5-inch digital deck of tarot, we must do it with full awareness of what it is and what it can do. Mindfulness and intention are key here. While pulling away from notions of casual use from these systems, we must balance our actions with reclamation of our own imagination, our own creativity, our own ability to craft narrative, and through the power of imagination, bring that narrative to life. This can be done through writing, painting, playing music, or any other act of physical involvement with creation. We have to remind ourselves of the sheer magic and power there is in holding something in our minds and through will bringing it out into the world. Then, when we have reaffirmed this power within ourselves, we are able to effectively communicate our gnosis to the psychics being used by the system to create this shit show we all find ourselves swimming in. The goal is to enlighten psychics to the knowledge that all the world is indeed a stage. Somehow or another, we must get them to perceive that the nonstop noise of the world that is seducing them into holding images of horrible outcomes is very much like a stage magician's parlor tricks. The 24-hour news cycle is Ahriman's sleight of hand that makes them not only participants in his narrative, but the active generators of it. The more they bombard their thoughts with the wars, plagues, the famines, the genocides, the scarcity, the injustices, and Donald Trump's fat fucking face, the more solidified in the material world these things become. As far-fetched as it may be for so many of them to comprehend, their imaginings of these things with emotion is the projector that is casting it all upon the screen. The chrism they create, and Ahriman craves, as the lifeblood of the new simulation that solidifies any given state of affairs. We can no longer afford to continue playing the Yaldabaoth Lush farm game if we desire to exit the dead world of apocalypse edging discussed in the first part of this series. When we were operating in that paradigm, the name of the game was identifying Sophia's sparks and psychics and delivering to them the gnosis they required to shed off as much of their mortal coil as possible and begin operating in their own pneuma. If we wish to be reinvigorated with that sense of purpose that once filled our etheric lungs after awakening, we must accept and operate under the guidelines of a completely new game. It is no longer about making the masses aware of a demiurge and his archons running a prison planet. That proverbial cat is now completely out of the bag. Our task is to push the narrative past that and fully into the new age of Ahriman we have stumbled into, mostly unaware. Which brings me neatly into the final scribbles of this series addressed to pneumatics able to receive it. When we began this State of the Simulation address, we opened with yours truly lamenting that post-storyline completion, the vast world of Grand Theft Auto 5 had become a ghost town, while still being visibly populated with NPCs and having tons of side quests left to complete, even with plenty to still do in Los Santos. Without a narrative being driven forth in a significant way, it all just felt like thumb twiddling. As a gamer who uses the medium for more therapeutic reasons over requirements for entertainment, this left me with a very obvious solution to the dull existence in a simulated world that had no more appeal or purpose for me. Hit eject, use the disc as a drink coaster, never to return, and slide a whole new world into my magic game box, which is exactly what I did. Shortly after beginning this series, I decided that in my leisure time, I would enter the simulated world of Red Dead Redemption 2, which, as you gamers are aware, is also developed by Rockstar Games. And while GTA 5 and RDR 2 are two vastly different games, you can still see the fingerprints of the former designers all over the latter. The attention to detail is flawless. The graphics and visual effects are like interacting with a moving portrait. The in-game physics are grounded and make sense to the type of story it immerses you in. The open world is massive and seemingly alive as you gallop across hills, plains, mountains, snowfields, hamlets, and cities galore. The story is enthralling, human, and well voiced by each character you meet in the western frontier of 1899. There is no doubt that the digital artists who brought Los Santos to life put all their passion into the story of Arthur Morgan in Red Dead Redemption 2, striving to bring the player into an experience that could feel like a second skin. Yet with all the two games have in common, you realize well into the early hours that you are dealing with a completely different simulation altogether from Grand Theft Auto 5. As Arthur Morgan, the gunslinger protagonist, you can still enact the dirtiest criminal deeds if you so wish. However, the world does not reward you as it would in GTA 5 for this type of gameplay. Rather, the world and its inhabitants tend to make your experience much lighter if you move your avatar around that world with more honor than villainy. The object of the game is not to amass a fortune through the establishment of a criminal empire built on stolen cars and armed deals gone bad, but to simply survive and cohabit an untamed frontier as best you can with others. Again, while there are some similarities, the motivations to lose yourself in the story are almost diametrically different. One world is built for speed. The other is meant to slow you down. Take your time. Enjoy the environment you find yourself in. And I love this. I suppose what this state of the simulation address has sought out to do is invite ye other pneumatics to join me in an endeavor to acknowledge a different game, learn its rules, and play it correctly, rather than how we have been accustomed. Believe me, if the masses are discussing Yaldabaoth, the Archons, and the reality of the soul-harvesting mechanism in the spheres, if this is the common narrative being played out by Hylix, we pneumatics ought to know we gonna be on some different shit, which means we must adjust our gnosis and its application to the Age of Ahriman while using the disc of the Demiurge as our new drink coaster. Until next time, keep your chrism clean.
This has been downloaded content. Want more pneumatic dialogue like this? Subscribe to the DLC newsletter at downloadedcontent.com. And be sure to follow across YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, and BitChute. See you on the next transmission.
This episode of Downloaded Content is proudly sponsored by CanaSense Total Wellness. If you're 21 or older, CanaSense offers free membership, 25% off your first order, premium hemp-derived wellness products, and nationwide shipping delivered directly to your door. Joining takes just minutes at canasense.com. CanaSense is committed to making wellness simple, affordable, and accessible. Veterans and cancer survivors may qualify for additional discounts, and our team is always available to help you find the products that best fit your needs. Use Downloaded Content as your sponsor when joining free and get 25% off your first order. Visit canasense.com or call 1-833-633-4208 to get started today. CanaSense Total Wellness. Full spectrum wellness shipped nationwide.